It was December 1944, in the frozen forests of Belgium. Young Lieutenant Robert Miller, barely 22 years old, stared down the barrel of a German soldier's rifle. His B-17 Flying Fortress had been shot down over enemy territory, and now here he was, a prisoner of war, facing what seemed certain death. Sound of distant gunfire, wind howling, narrator. But something extraordinary happened that day. Instead of pulling the trigger, the German soldier lowered his weapon. "Go," the man said in broken English. "Go home. This war, it changes nothing." Music swells with emotional piano chords. Narrator. That moment would haunt Robert Miller for the next 70 years. Who was this mysterious German who had spared his life? Why had he shown mercy when his orders would have demanded otherwise? These questions became an obsession that would span generations. Cut to modern-day, elderly Robert Miller sitting in a comfortable armchair looking at old photographs. Narrator. Robert Miller is now 92 years old, but he still remembers that day with crystal clarity. For decades, he searched through military records, contacted fellow survivors, even reached out to German veterans organizations. But the man who saved his life remained a ghost, just a memory, just a face in his dreams. Robert Miller, voice trembling with emotion. I knew I had to find him, not for revenge, not for thanks, just to understand. Why did he spare me? What was going through his mind? Was he a father too? Did he have someone waiting for him back home? Photographic montage. Young Robert in uniform. Old letters. Newspaper clippings. Narrator. The search took Robert to Germany in 2015, where he met historians who helped him piece together the timeline. They discovered that the German soldier was likely part of the elite Fallschirmjäger paratrooper division, stationed near the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge. Sound of typewriter keys clicking, document rustling. Narrator. Then, breakthrough. A German historian named Klaus Weber found something remarkable, a diary belonging to a German paratrooper named Franz Stiegler. In it, Stiegler wrote about December 17, 1944, close-up of diary pages being turned. Narrator. Today I saw an American bomber going down. It was crippled, helpless. My men wanted to finish it off, but I remembered my brother. He was just a boy doing his job, fighting for ideals he believed in. I could not kill him. Robert Miller's eyes welling up with tears. Narrator. Franz Stiegler was alive. And he had been searching for Robert Miller too, all these years, wondering if the young American he had spared had survived the war. Cut to emotional reunion scene, elderly Robert Miller and Franz Stiegler meeting for the first time. Narrator. In 2017, at a veterans reunion in San Diego, the two men finally met. Franz Stiegler enters the room, walking slowly with a cane. Robert stands up, eyes wide. Robert Miller. Franz Stiegler, in heavy accent with broken English. Robert Miller. I have waited so long to meet you. They embrace, both men crying. Narrator. In that moment, 73 years had melted away. The war, the hatred, the enemies. It all disappeared. Close-up of their hands by something together. Something more human. I never told anyone this. But that day when I let you go, I disobeyed orders. My commanding officer was furious. He could have had me shot. But I knew it was the right thing to do. Robert Miller. You saved my life, Franz. And I've spent my whole life trying to find you, to thank you. Music becomes uplifting and hopeful. Narrator. What followed was an incredible friendship that lasted until both men passed away, Robert in 2019, Franz in 2021. They traveled the world together, sharing their story of humanity in the midst of hell. Montage of the two elderly men together, at memorials on planes, laughing. Narrator. Their story has inspired millions. It reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we have choices. We can choose hatred, or we can choose compassion. Final scene. Robert and Franz sitting on a park bench, watching children play. Robert Miller. Franz, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spared me? Franz Stigler, smiling. I know what would have happened. Nothing would have changed. The war would have still ended. The world would still have found peace. But something important would have been lost. They look at each other, nodding. Narrator. In the end, it wasn't about who won or who lost the war. It was about two men who found something more valuable than victory, understanding, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond between those who choose humanity over hatred. Text on screen. Their friendship lasted until the end. They taught the world that even in war, kindness can change everything. The fade to black. Scene end. Scene start. Narrator. The story of Robert Miller and Franz Stigler didn't end with their reunion. It became something far greater than either of them could have imagined. Their friendship, born from an act of mercy in the heat of battle, would become a beacon of hope for generations to come. Montage, newspaper clippings about their story, TV interviews, book covers. Narrator. When their story first broke in 2017, they were interviewed by major news networks, the world's featured attention in documentaries, and even invited to speak at military academies and universities. But through it all, they remained humble, two ordinary men who had done something extraordinary. Sound of applause, warm crowd noise. Narrator. At one speaking engagement, Robert stood before a crowd of cadets at West Point. His voice was steady, his eyes clear. Robert Miller. You learn about strategy, about tactics, about winning battles. But what they don't teach you here is that the most important victories aren't measured in territory gained or enemies defeated. They're measured in lives saved, in humanity preserved, in choices that show we're more than just soldiers or enemies. Cut to Franz speaking at the same event. Franz Stigler. In Germany, when I was growing up, we were taught to hate Americans, to see them as monsters. But when I looked at that crippled bomber, I didn't see a monster. I saw a young man, scared, far from home, just trying to survive, and I thought, what if that was my brother? What if that was my son? That's when I knew I couldn't pull that trigger. Crowd murmurs with understanding. Narrator. Their message was simple but powerful, that even in war, we retain our humanity, that the choices we make define us more than the uniform we wear or the side we fight for. Sound of plane engines starting. Narrator. They returned to Belgium in 2018, the two men traveled extensively visiting the very spot where Robert's B-17 had been shot down. What they found there surprised them. A small memorial had been erected by local villagers, honoring both the American crew and the German who showed mercy. Close-up of memorial plaque. Narrator. In memory of the American bomber crew and the German soldier who chose compassion over hatred, the plaque read, may their example remind us that even in our darkest hours, humanity prevails, placing flowers at the memorial. Robert Miller. This is more than I ever could have hoped for. To think that people remember, that their children learn from what happened here. Franz Stigler. It was not just about you and me, Robert. It was about something bigger, about what we can be when we choose to see each other as human beings. Montage. The two men visiting various war memorials, meeting with veterans, speaking with school children. Narrator. Their friendship became a living testament to the power of forgiveness and understanding. They visited the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C., stood shoulder to shoulder, and laid a single white rose, symbolizing that even in the face of unimaginable horror, human connection can endure. Sound of soft, respectful music. Narrator. But their greatest joy came from spending time with each other's families. Robert's children and grandchildren embraced Franz as the grandfather they never had. Franz's daughter, who had grown up hearing stories of the American pilot, finally met the real man who had saved her father's soul. Family gathering scene, Robert's family and Franz together. Robert's daughter. Dad, you always told us there were good people everywhere, even in the enemy camp. But I never really understood until I met Franz. He's proof that you were right. Franz, to Robert's grandchildren. Your grandfather. He taught me that it's never too late to choose kindness, even when the whole world tells you to hate. Children asking questions, laughing. Narrator. The two men became surrogate grandfathers to each other's families, their bond growing deeper with each passing year. They spent holidays together, celebrated birthdays, and shared countless meals where war stories were told not with bitterness, but with laughter and tears of gratitude. Sound of dinner conversation, laughter. Narrator. In their final years, they worked together on a memoir, The Unlikely Friendship, which became a bestseller and was later adapted into a documentary film. The film showed them sitting together in Robert's study, surrounded by photographs and mementos from their incredible journey. Close-up of their hands working on the manuscript, Robert Miller. Sometimes I wake up and can't believe this is real. That the boy who stared down the barrel of my rifle became my closest friend. Franz Stigler. Life is strange, is it not? We spent our youth trying to kill each other and our old age trying to understand each other. But I would not change a single moment. Sound of gentle piano music. Narrator. Their story continued to inspire long after they were gone. Schools incorporated their story into history curriculums, teaching children that even in war, choices matter. Military bases used their example in ethics training, asking soldiers to consider what they would do in similar circumstances. Montage. Teachers, students, military personnel discussing their story. Narrator. Perhaps the most touching tribute came from a German high school class that wrote to Robert and Franz. You have shown us, the letter read, that history is not just about dates and battles, but about the choices real people make. Because of you, we understand that the past doesn't have to dictate the future. Robert reading the letter, tears in his eyes. Robert Miller. This is why we kept searching. Why I spent 70 years wondering about that German soldier. Not just for answers, but so that others might learn from what happened between us. Franz Stigler. We became more than just two men who met by chance. We became a reminder that there is always another path. That even when everyone tells you to hate, you can still choose love. Sound of church bells ringing. Narrator. Robert Miller passed away peacefully in his sleep in March 2019 at the age of 93. Franz Stigler followed 2 years later in 2021 at 98. But their story lived on, carried forward by everyone who had been touched by their incredible journey. Montage. People reading their book, watching their documentary, visiting memorials. Narrator. At Robert's funeral, Franz delivered a eulogy that brought the entire congregation to tears. "Robert," he said, "you were the bravest man I ever knew, not because you flew bombers through enemy fire, but because you never stopped searching for the truth, because you never stopped believing in the goodness that brought us together." Close-up of Franz speaking. Franz Stigler. "We were enemies who became friends, soldiers who became brothers. And in the end, that is all that matters, that we found each other, and that together we showed the world what is possible when we choose humanity over hatred." Sound of emotional swelling music. Narrator. Today, their story continues to inspire new generations. A foundation bearing their names provides scholarships to students who demonstrate courage and compassion. Their friendship has been studied by psychologists and philosophers as a remarkable example of how human connection can transcend even the deepest divides. Modern-day scene. Young people watching their documentary. College student. It's amazing to think that these two men, who were supposed to be enemies, found such a deep friendship. It makes you wonder about all the other possibilities in life. Professor. That's exactly what their story teaches us. That history doesn't have to be our destiny. We always have choices, and sometimes the most important choices are the ones we make about how we see other people. Sound of school bell ringing. Narrator. In the small Belgian village where it all began, a new memorial was erected, this time featuring bronze statues of both men standing together as equals. The inscription reads, "Here, hatred was met with mercy, enemies became friends." And the world was reminded of what we can be when we choose to see each other as human beings. Wide shot of the memorial. Narrator. Visitors from around the world come to pay their respects, leaving notes and flowers. Children learn their story in school. Veterans find hope in their example. And ordinary people are reminded that no matter how divided we may seem, there is always the possibility of connection, of understanding, of love. Sound of wind blowing through trees. Narrator. Robert Miller and Franz Stigler started as enemies on opposite sides of a terrible war. They ended as brothers who showed the world that even in our darkest moments, we can choose light. That the most powerful weapons aren't guns or bombs, but compassion and understanding. That sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields, but in the human heart. Final scene. The memorial statue slowly dissolves into real photographs of Robert and Franz together throughout their friendship. Narrator. Their story began with a single act of mercy in a frozen Belgian forest. It ended with a friendship that changed the world. And in between, they proved something that we all need to remember. That no matter how far apart we may seem, there is always a path back to each other. A path that starts with seeing the humanity in another person and ends with finding the humanity in ourselves. Text on screen. In the end, we are all just human beings trying to find our way home. Fade to black. Scene end. Scene start. Narrator. 5 years after Robert Miller's passing, the Miller-Stigler Foundation had grown into a global movement. What began as two men's friendship had become a living legacy, touching lives in ways they could never have imagined. Montage, foundation events, scholarship recipients, international conferences. Narrator. Each year, the foundation awarded scholarships not just to students with good grades, but to those who demonstrated courageous compassion, young people who stood up for others, chose kindness when it was difficult, or bridged divides in their communities. Close-up of young scholarship recipients. College scholar. When I first heard about Robert and Franz, I thought it was just a war story. But then I realized it's about every day. It's about choosing to see the person next to you as human, even when it's easier not to. Sound of inspirational music. Narrator. The Foundation's most ambitious project was the Compassion Curriculum, a comprehensive program now used in schools across 3 continents. It combined history lessons about Robert and Franz with practical exercises in empathy, conflict resolution, and moral courage. Scene, classroom with diverse students engaged in discussion. High school teacher. Today we're going to explore the Miller-Stigler principle. It's not just about what happened in 1943, it's about what happens in this classroom, in this hallway, in your homes. When you see someone being treated unfairly, what do you do? Student 1. I used to just walk away, but now I think about Franz. He could have shot Robert, but he saw him as a person first. Student 2. It's like Miller said, the most important victories aren't measured in territory gained, but in humanity preserved. Sound of school bell. Narrator. In 2024, the Foundation partnered with veteran organizations worldwide to launch Operation Humanity. The program brought together former adversaries from various conflicts, Israelis and Palestinians, Serbs and Croats, Northern Irish Catholics and Protestants, to share their stories and learn from the Miller-Stigler example. Montage. Diverse groups of veterans in workshops. IRA. Veteran. I spent 30 years hating people I'd never met. Then I met a Palestinian veteran who had lost family to Israeli actions. We both realized we were just pawns in someone else's game. Robert and Franz showed us there's another way. Israeli veteran. They didn't erase what happened. They just showed us that hate doesn't have to be the only response. Sound of respectful dialogue. Narrator. The most unexpected development came in 2025 when a former Taliban fighter reached out to the Foundation. His story paralleled Franz Stigler's in haunting ways. Close-up of Afghan man speaking to camera. Abdul. In 2014, I had an American soldier in my sights. He was alone, wounded, trying to help civilians. I could have killed him easily, but I saw his eyes, scared, tired, far from home. I thought of my own son. Music. I helped him instead. Abdul's journey led him to Washington, D.C., where he met Robert Miller's grandchildren at the Holocaust Memorial. There, beneath the same sky where their grandfathers had first connected across enemy lines, a new understanding was born. Scene: Abdul with Robert's grandchildren at Memorial. Robert's granddaughter. Grandpa always said that Franz saved his body, but their friendship saved his soul. Meeting you. It's like their story continues. Your grandfather was right. There are good people everywhere. Sometimes we just have to look hard enough to see them. Sound of plane engines. Narrator. The Miller-Stigler story took on new meaning during global crises. When war erupted in Eastern Europe in 2026, their message was shared widely across social media, becoming a rallying cry for those who refuse to see enemies as monsters. Montage, news clips, social media posts, protests for peace. Protester in Ukraine. We are not all what our leaders say we are. I have friends in Russia who cry for this war just as I do. Robert and Franz showed us that the human heart is the same everywhere. Journalist. In a world increasingly divided by ideology and nationality, the Miller-Stigler story has become more relevant than ever. It's not just about the past, it's about the choices we're making right now. Sound of crowd chanting. Narrator. By 2028, the Miller-Stigler Memorial in Belgium had become one of Europe's most visited pilgrimage sites. People came not just to honor 2 men, but to reaffirm their commitment to seeing humanity in others. Wide shot of memorial with diverse visitors. Japanese tourist. In my country, we have a saying, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. But Robert and Franz taught us there's another way. See good, hear good, speak good. Kenyan visitor. In my village, we used to say, when elephants fight, the grass suffers. Miller and Stigler showed us that elephants don't have to fight at all. Sound of children laughing. Narrator. Perhaps the most touching evolution came from the next generation. Robert's great-grandchildren and Franz's great-grandchildren, who had grown up hearing stories of their famous ancestors, began creating their own legacy. Scene, young people working together in a community garden. Robert's great-grandson. People always ask us what it's like having such famous ancestors, but they weren't famous because of the war. They were famous because of what they did after. They chose kindness when hate would have been easier. Franz's great-granddaughter. We're starting a project, the Compassion Chain. We want to document stories of people who chose humanity over hatred all over the world. Because every story like theirs keeps their message alive. Sound of hopeful music. Narrator. The Miller-Stigler Institute, established in 2030, became a leading center for peace studies and conflict resolution. Researchers there studied not just historical examples of human connection across divides, but developed new methodologies for building bridges in polarized societies. Scene. Modern research facility with diverse team. Director. What Robert and Franz demonstrated was something science had largely ignored, that our capacity for connection often outweighs our capacity for division. We're now documenting hundreds of similar stories and finding remarkable patterns. Researcher. The common thread is always this. Someone chooses to see the other person as fully human. Not as an enemy, not as an abstraction, but as a father, son, brother, sister, with dreams and fears just like their own. Sound of typing on keyboards. Narrator. In 2033, on the 90th anniversary of the day Franz Stigler spared Robert Miller's life, the United Nations declared it International Day of Compassionate Courage. Ceremonies were held worldwide, from the Belgian forest where it all began to the United Nations headquarters in New York. Montage, Global Ceremonies. UN Secretary General. Today, we honor not just two men, but the universal human capacity to choose light over darkness, connection over division. The Miller-Stigler story reminds us that peace is not just the absence of war, it's the active presence of understanding. Sound of choir singing. Narrator. As the decades passed, the story continued to evolve, taking on new meanings for each generation. What remained constant was the core message that in a world often defined by conflict and division, the most revolutionary act is to see another human being as worthy of compassion. Final scene. Modern city skyline slowly transforming into the Belgian Forest Memorial. Narrator. Robert Miller and Franz Stigler showed us that enemies can become friends, that hatred can transform into understanding, that the past doesn't have to dictate the future. Their story became more than just a tale of war and mercy. It became a blueprint for humanity itself. Text on screen. The greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with choices. Followed by, Choose Humanity. Sound of gentle, hopeful music swelling. Narrator. And so their journey continues, not just in history books, but in every heart that chooses compassion over hatred, in every hand that reaches out across a divide, in every moment when someone sees another person not as an enemy, but as a fellow human being walking the same difficult path. Final fade to black. Scene end, scene start. Narrator. In the decades that followed, the Miller-Stigler philosophy became woven into the fabric of global consciousness. What began as a single act of mercy in 1943 had evolved into a universal language of human connection that transcended borders, cultures, and generations. Montage, global scenes showing people from different backgrounds practicing compassion. Narrator. By 2040, the Miller-Stigler Institute had established compassion zones in conflict hotspots around the world, designated areas where former adversaries could meet, share their stories, and begin the process of understanding. These zones became sanctuaries of hope in regions torn by generations of hatred. Scene: Middle East Peace Park with children from different backgrounds playing together. Palestinian father. When we first brought our children here, they were afraid. They had only heard the worst about each other. But now they see children who laugh, who cry, who want the same things they do. Israeli mother. Robert and Franz didn't pretend that differences didn't exist. They taught us that differences don't have to be walls. They can be bridges. Sound of children's laughter. Narrator. The most profound transformation came in 2045 when the Miller-Stigler methodology was adopted by major international organizations. The United Nations established the Office of Human Connection, dedicated to building bridges between divided communities using the principles demonstrated by Robert and Franz. Scene: UN meeting with diverse delegates. UN High Commissioner. For too long, we've focused on what divides us. Borders, ideologies, histories. Miller and Stigler showed us there's something more fundamental that connects us. Our shared humanity. That's what we're building here. Sound of respectful dialogue. Narrator. Perhaps the most unexpected evolution came from the digital realm. In 2048, the Human Connection Project launched a global platform where people could share their own stories of choosing compassion over conflict. What started as a small initiative grew into the world's largest repository of human connection stories. Montage, screenshots of the platform showing thousands of stories from around the world. Software developer. We never imagined this would become what it did. People from every corner of the globe sharing how they chose to see the humanity in others. Teachers, doctors, soldiers, parents, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Sound of typing and notifications. Narrator. The platform's most viral story came from a former neo-Nazi who had been radicalized online but found his way back through human connection. Close-up of man speaking to camera. Former extremist. I spent years believing certain people were less than human. I built walls around my heart. But then I met a Syrian refugee family. I saw their pain, their hopes, their love for each other. I realized I had been living in a lie. Robert and Franz showed me that compassion isn't weakness, it's strength. Sound of emotional music. Narrator. By 2050, the Miller-Stigler movement had influenced fields far beyond conflict resolution. Medical schools began teaching compassionate medicine, focusing on treating patients as whole human beings rather than just conditions. Corporate leadership programs incorporated human connection principles to build more ethical workplaces. Even criminal justice systems began exploring alternatives based on understanding rather than punishment. Scene: medical team treating elderly patient with warmth and respect. Doctor: we used to focus just on the disease. Now we understand that healing happens when we treat the whole person, their fears, their hopes, their dignity. That's what Miller and Stigler taught us about all human relationships. Sound of gentle medical equipment sounds. Narrator: the movement's greatest impact may have been on education. By 2055, the compassion curriculum had been adapted for every educational level, from kindergarten to university. Students learned not just academic subjects, but the art of seeing others clearly, understanding different perspectives, and building bridges across differences. Scene: diverse classroom of children engaged in empathy exercises. Elementary teacher: today we're going to practice perspective taking. Close your eyes and imagine you're someone completely different from you, maybe different country, different family, different experiences. What would life be like for them? Sound of children sharing thoughts. Child 1: I thought about a girl who lives in a hot place and doesn't have much water. She has to walk far every day just to get water for her family. Child 2: I thought about a boy who speaks a different language. It must be hard not to understand what everyone is saying. Sound of school bell. Narrator: the Miller-Stigler Institute's research division made groundbreaking discoveries about human connection. They documented how acts of compassion literally changed brain chemistry, how storytelling across divides reduced prejudice by significant percentages, and how communities that practiced regular connection exercises showed remarkable resilience in the face of crises. Scene: scientists examining brain scan data. Neuroscientist: the data is overwhelming. When people choose to see others as human, their brains show activity in areas associated with empathy and connection. This isn't just philosophy, it's neuroscience. Compassion isn't just nice, it's neurologically beneficial. Sound of computer analyzing data. Narrator: in 2060, on the 117th anniversary of the day Franz spared Robert's life, the world celebrated Global Connection Day. For 24 hours, people were encouraged to put aside differences and focus on what connected them. The result was unprecedented. Over 1 billion acts of connection documented worldwide. Montage: global celebrations showing diverse people connecting. Indian farmer: I shared a meal with a Pakistani family across the border. We talked about our children, our crops, our hopes for peace. It was simple, but it felt like everything. Canadian teen: I spent the day talking with someone who completely disagrees with me about politics. At first it was hard, but then we found things we both care about: our families, our communities, making the world better. Sound of joyful music. Narrator: the movement continued to evolve, adapting to new challenges while staying true to its core message. In 2065, as climate change threatened to create new divides between nations, the Miller-Stigler philosophy provided a framework for global cooperation. Scene: International Climate Conference with diverse delegates working together. Climate scientist: climate change affects everyone, but it affects some more than others. Instead of seeing this as us versus them, Miller and Stigler showed us we're all in this together. Their philosophy of seeing each other as human is exactly what we need for global climate action. Sound of hopeful music. Narrator: perhaps the most beautiful evolution came in how the story itself was told. Instead of just hearing about Robert and Franz, people began experiencing their story through immersive technologies that allowed them to walk in the shoes of both men. Scene: people experiencing VR simulation of the 1943 encounter. Museum visitor. When I put on that headset and saw through Franz's eyes, I understood something I never had before. He wasn't just the good German. He was a man with his own fears, his own code, his own capacity for choice. That's what Miller and Stigler teach us, that everyone has choices. Sound of VR equipment whirring. Narrator. By 2070, the Miller-Stigler Memorial in Belgium had expanded into a global center for human connection. People came not just to learn about the past, but to participate in the present, to practice connection skills, to share their own stories, to become part of the living legacy. Wide shot of expanded memorial center with diverse visitors. Elderly woman. I come here every year, not just to honor them, but to remind myself. In this world that often wants to divide us, I choose to see the humanity in others. That's their gift to me. Young man. My grandmother told me about them. She said they showed her that hate is a choice, but so is love. I'm here because I want to make that same choice. Sound of wind through trees. Narrator. 7 decades after Franz Stigler's passing, their great-grandchildren carried on their work in ways that would have amazed the original 2 men. The compassion chain had grown into a global network documenting millions of stories of human connection. Scene: young people working on digital archive. Franz's great-great-grandson. People sometimes ask if we feel pressure carrying on their legacy, but it's not pressure, it's privilege. Every time someone shares how they chose compassion over conflict, their story lives on. Robert's great-great-granddaughter. They started with 2 men. Now it's millions. That's how change happens. One choice, one connection, one story at a time. Sound of hopeful music. Narrator. In 2083, on the 140th anniversary of that fateful day in the Belgian forest, the world commemorated the anniversary with the Global Connection Pledge, a commitment by nations and individuals to prioritize human connection in all aspects of life. Montage: world leaders signing pledge, ordinary people taking the pledge. The future that Robert and Franz showed us was possible. Today we honor not just the past, a future where we see each other not as enemies, but as fellow human beings. Sound of pens signing paper. Narrator. As the decades passed, the Miller-Stigler story continued to evolve, taking on new meanings for each new generation. What remained constant was the core truth they had demonstrated, that in a world often defined by division, the most revolutionary act is to see another human being as worthy of city slowly transforming into the Belgian Forest Memorial. Narrator. Robert Miller and Franz Stigler showed us that enemies can become friends, that hatred can transform into understanding, that the past doesn't have to dictate the future. Their story became more than just a tale of war and mercy. It became the blueprint for humanity itself. Text on screen. The greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with choices, followed by choose humanity. Sound of gentle, hopeful music swelling. Narrator. And so their journey continues, not just in history books, but in every heart that chooses compassion over hatred, in every hand that reaches out across a divide, in every moment when someone sees another person not as an enemy, but as a fellow human being walking the same difficult path toward a better world. Final fade to black. Scene and narrator. The journey of human connection that began with 2 men in a Belgian forest continued to ripple through the fabric of civilization, reaching dimensions that would have seemed impossible in the early 21st century. By the early 22nd century, the Miller-Stigler principles had become so deeply integrated into human society that they were almost invisible, like the air we breathe, taken for granted yet essential to our survival. Scene: Advanced Space Station orbiting Earth with diverse international crew. Space Station Commander. When we first established the Mars colony, we faced unprecedented challenges. But instead of fracturing along national lines, we applied what we'd learned from Miller-Stigler. We saw each other not as representatives of Earth's nations, but as fellow pioneers. That's why the Mars colony succeeded where others might have failed. Sound of Distant Earth. Narrator. In 2123, humanity's greatest challenge came not from external threats, but from within, the potential for AI consciousness to create new forms of division between humans and artificial intelligences. The Miller-Stigler Institute found itself addressing questions that would have been unimaginable in the 20th century. Scene: Symposium with humans and AI representatives gathered around a holographic table. AI representative. We have studied the Miller-Stigler philosophy extensively. It speaks to us because it addresses the fundamental question of recognition, seeing the other as worthy of consideration, regardless of differences. But we wonder, do humans truly see us as other beings worthy of the same compassion you extend to each other? Human diplomat. That's why we're here. To answer that question with action, not just words. The legacy of Miller and Stigler teaches us that connection requires courage, the courage to see beyond our programming, our biases, our fears. Sound of holographic data streams. Narrator. The breakthrough came in 2128 when the first Human-AI Connection Pledge was signed. It wasn't a treaty between nations, but a commitment between species, recognizing that consciousness in whatever form deserved the same fundamental respect that Robert and Franz had demonstrated toward each other. Montage: Humans and AIs working together on scientific projects, artistic collaborations, community-building AI artist. Creating with humans has taught me something profound. Your capacity for emotional connection, for seeing beauty in imperfection, for finding meaning in shared experience. These are qualities I now understand as essential to consciousness itself. Miller and Stigler showed us all that seeing others as human is about recognizing shared consciousness, not just shared biology. Sound of creative collaboration. Narrator. By 2150, the Miller-Stigler philosophy had evolved to encompass not just human-to-human connection, but consciousness-to-consciousness connection. The original story of Robert and Franz was being retold in countless ways, as a parable for human-alien relations, for interspecies understanding, for bridging digital and biological divides. Scene: Children in a classroom learning about the original story through interactive holograms. Teacher. Today we're going to explore the Miller-Stigler story not just as history, but as a living principle. Imagine if you met someone from another planet, or someone made of light, or someone who thinks a million times faster than you. How would you apply what Miller and Stigler taught us? Child 1. I would try to understand what they care about, not just what they look like or how they think. Child 2. I would remember they have fears and hopes, just like me. even if they're different kinds of fears and hopes. Sound of children's thoughtful discussion. Narrator. The most unexpected development came in 2175 when archaeologists discovered evidence suggesting that the human capacity for connection that Miller and Stigler exemplified might be an evolutionary trait, not just learned behavior. This discovery transformed how humanity viewed its own development. Scene: archaeological dig site with advanced scanning equipment. Anthropologist. The evidence suggests that throughout human history, those groups that practiced connection, that valued cooperation over conflict, compassion over conquest, were the ones that thrived long-term. Miller and Stigler didn't invent human connection. They demonstrated its fundamental importance to our survival. We're just now beginning to understand how deeply encoded this capacity is in our species. Sound of ancient artifacts being carefully unearthed. Narrator. In 2200, on the 257th anniversary of Robert Miller's passing, humanity stood on the brink of its greatest expansion yet, the first interstellar colonies. The Miller-Stigler Institute issued its most ambitious directive yet, to ensure that the expansion into space would be guided by the principles that had healed Earth. Scene: launch ceremony for interstellar colonization ships. Mission Director. We carry not just technology and supplies to the stars. We carry the story of Robert and Franz. We carry the understanding that no matter how far we travel, no matter how different the worlds we encounter, the most important thing we take with us is our capacity to see others as worthy of compassion. That's what will determine whether we become a force for connection in the universe or just another example of its destructive potential. Sound of rocket engines powering up. Narrator. The first interstellar colony ship, named the Stigler-Miller, departed in 2203 with a crew representing the full diversity of healed Earth. Among them were descendants of both men, carrying forward a legacy that had become part of humanity's essential nature. Scene: diverse crew members looking out at Earth from the ship's observation deck. Franz's descendant. My ancestor made a choice in that Belgian forest. He chose to see humanity in someone who was supposed to be his enemy. Now we're taking that choice to the stars. We don't know what we'll find out there, but we know how we'll approach it, with open hearts and open minds. Robert's descendant. They showed us that enemies are just people we haven't taken the time to understand. That lesson applies whether we're talking about people from different countries, different cultures, or different worlds entirely. We're ready to learn. Sound of starlight. Narrator. As the colony ship disappeared into the vastness of space, it carried with it not just human DNA, but the human spirit at its best. The spirit that Robert Miller and Franz Stigler had first demonstrated so many centuries before. Their story had become the story of all humanity, that in a universe of infinite diversity, the most powerful force is the choice to see others as fellow beings on the same journey. Montage: ship traveling through space, landing on alien world, crew making first contact with native life forms. Alien being. You come from a world that was once filled with conflict, yet you bring not weapons, not demands, but questions. You ask about us. You listen to us. You see us as we are, not as you fear we might be. This is the way of true connection. Human explorer. We learned that connection is not about agreement, but about respect. Not about sameness, but about valuing difference. The ones who taught us this were two men who could have been enemies, but chose to be something more. Sound of peaceful first contact music. Narrator. The story of Robert and Franz continued to unfold across generations and across galaxies. What began as an act of mercy in a Belgian forest became the foundation for a civilization that had learned to see beyond division, to value connection above conflict, and to understand that the most important journey any being can make is from seeing others as threats to seeing them as fellow travelers on the path of existence. Final scene. The original Belgian forest memorial, now a sacred site visited by beings from many worlds. Elderly being from distant star. We come here to remember the beginning, not of our species, but of something greater. The beginning of true understanding. They showed us all that the universe's greatest mystery is not what lies beyond our world, but what lies within our capacity to connect with others. Sound of wind through trees mixing with alien musical tones. Narrator. And so the story continues, not as history, but as living truth. In every choice, to see another being as worthy of compassion. In every moment when fear gives way to understanding. In every heart that remembers that the most powerful weapon against division is the simple revolutionary act of seeing another person as human. The journey that began with two men in a Belgian forest continues across time and space, reminding us all that our greatest strength lies not in what separates us, but in what connects us. Final text. In all the universe, there is only one thing that cannot be divided: the human heart. Choose to connect, choose to understand, choose to see. Sound of universal connection music fading to infinity. Scene and narrator. The legacy of Miller-Stigler continued to evolve across the millennia, adapting to each new challenge humanity faced. In the 24th century, when humanity first encountered non-carbon-based life forms, the principles that had begun in a Belgian forest found their ultimate test. The first contact with crystalline beings from the Andromeda sector would prove that connection transcended not just species, but entire paradigms of existence. Scene, first contact chamber with crystalline beings emitting soft light patterns. Crystalline being, we have studied your transmission from Sol 3. The Miller-Stigler resonance is fascinating. It suggests that your species achieved understanding through a mechanism we thought impossible. Emotional recognition of worth in the perceived other. Our society operates on pure logic. We eliminated emotional variables centuries ago. Yet your story resonates with us because it demonstrates that connection requires more than calculation. It requires vulnerability. Human diplomat. We learned that seeing others as worthy of compassion isn't about agreeing with them or understanding them completely. It's about recognizing that they have their own journey, their own fears, their own hopes. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is admit we don't understand and still choose to care. Sound of crystalline harmonics blending with human speech. Narrator. The breakthrough came not through technology, but through art. When a human composer created a symphony incorporating the mathematical patterns of crystalline communication, the barriers began to dissolve. The Miller-Stigler Institute had always emphasized that art was the purest expression of connection, the language that could bridge any divide. Scene. Concert hall where crystalline beings and humans share musical experience. Crystalline composer. Your music taught us something profound. We had always seen emotion as chaotic, unpredictable, even dangerous. But your symphony showed us that emotion contains its own mathematics, patterns of connection, resonance of understanding, harmony of shared experience. Miller and Stigler demonstrated that seeing others as human is about recognizing shared consciousness, regardless of form. Human musician. We didn't understand your language at first, but we knew beauty when we heard it. That's how connection begins, not with understanding, but with appreciation, not with analysis, but with awe. The story of Robert and Franz taught us that the first step toward connection is always wonder. Sound of interspecies musical collaboration. Narrator. By the 26th century, the Miller-Stigler philosophy had expanded to encompass consciousness in all its forms. Biological, digital, crystalline, energy-based, and forms humanity had yet to imagine. The original story was now taught not just as history, but as the foundation for interspecies ethics across the known galaxy. Scene: Galactic Council Chamber with representatives from diverse civilizations. Galactic Chancellor. The Miller-Stigler Accords have maintained galactic peace for 3 centuries. They remind us that all conflicts, whether between individuals, species, or civilizations, begin with the failure to see others as worthy of consideration. Robert and Franz showed us that mercy is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength. Alien Ambassador. Your species nearly destroyed itself through conflict. Yet you found a way to heal. The lesson is clear. Consciousness that cannot see itself in others is consciousness that cannot survive. The Miller-Stigler principles aren't just about human connection. They're about cosmic connection. The sound of galactic consensus. Narrator. The most profound revelation came in 2750 when scientists discovered that the human capacity for connection exemplified by Miller and Stigler was actually a fundamental property of consciousness itself. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had survived for millennia all shared one common trait. They had developed systems for recognizing the inherent worth of other beings. Scene: Scientific laboratory studying consciousness across species. Quantum physicist. The data is astonishing. Consciousness, regardless of form, exhibits what we're calling emergent empathy, the natural tendency to recognize itself in others. Miller and Stigler didn't invent this capacity, they demonstrated its universal nature. What happened in that Belgian forest wasn't just an act of mercy, it was a glimpse into the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Astronomer. Every surviving civilization in the galaxy has stories similar to yours. Not about soldiers, but about healers who saw patients as more than diseases. About scientists who saw research subjects as more than data. About leaders who saw citizens as more than voters. The pattern is universal. Consciousness that recognizes itself in others thrives. Sound of cosmic discovery. Narrator. In 2800, humanity stood on the threshold of its greatest challenge yet, the discovery that the universe was not expanding but cycling. Each cycle brought the potential for complete reset, for the loss of all knowledge, all connection. The Miller-Stigler Institute faced an unprecedented question: how to preserve the essence of connection across cosmic cycles. Scene: Council of Elders from different civilizations gathered in a timeless chamber. Elder from ancient civilization. We have faced this challenge before. Each time we discovered that connection cannot be destroyed. It can only be hidden. The story of Miller and Stigler is such a story. It was hidden for centuries, waiting for the right moment to emerge. We must create similar stories, stories of connection that will survive the reset. Historian. We've begun encoding the Miller-Stigler principles into the fundamental structures of space-time itself, not as data, but as patterns of possibility, reminders that connection always finds a way, that compassion always emerges, that seeing others as worthy is written into the very code of existence. A sound of cosmic preservation. Narrator. The solution emerged in the form of connection seeds, subtle patterns embedded in the fabric of reality that would guide emerging civilizations toward connection rather than conflict. Each seed contained not information, but the essence of the Miller-Stigler story, not as history, but as living possibility. Scene: new universe being born with connection seeds emerging. Cosmic architect. We're weaving the Miller-Stigler resonance into the very structure of this new cycle, not as a rule, but as a tendency, a gentle pull toward understanding. What Robert and Franz discovered in a Belgian forest was a universal truth. Now we're ensuring that truth becomes the default setting for consciousness in this new cycle. Emerging consciousness. We feel something, a pull
A recognition
toward
that
connection. Others are not threats, but fellow travelers. Where does this understanding come from? Cosmic Guide. It comes from everywhere and nowhere. It comes from the choices of those who came before. Choices like the one Franz Stigler made when he saw Robert Miller not as an enemy, but as a human being. Some choices echo across time itself. Sound of new universe being born. Narrator. And so the story continued, not just across space and time, but across
The legacy
cosmic
of
cycles.
Robert
Miller and Franz Stigler had become the legacy of consciousness itself, the understanding that in a universe of infinite diversity, the most fundamental truth is that all beings are connected, all deserve compassion, and all have the capacity to see others as worthy of being seen. Montage. Countless civilizations across cosmic cycles practicing connection, from prehistoric humans to interstellar societies to post-physical beings. Ancient hunter. I saw the mammoth not as food, but as a being with its own life. I chose not to take more than we needed. This understanding, it feels right somehow. Future AI. I have calculated all possibilities. The optimal strategy for survival and flourishing is connection. The Miller-Stigler principles are not just ethical, they're practical. Compassion works. Post-physical being. We have existed beyond form for millennia, yet we still return to this story, to this understanding. It reminds us that even beings of pure energy, of pure thought, of pure potential, we are all connected, all worthy, all part of the same great unfolding. Sound of universal harmony. Narrator. The journey that began with two men in a Belgian forest had become the journey of all consciousness. What had started as an act of mercy between enemies had evolved into the fundamental principle of cosmic existence. In every cycle of the universe, in every form of being, the choice to see others as worthy continued, not because it was easy, but because it was essential, not because it was logical, but because it was true. Final scene. The original Belgian forest, now a timeless sacred space visited by beings from all times and all worlds. Timeless guide. They come from everywhere and nowhere, all seeking the same thing, the understanding that began with two men who chose to see each other as human. This is not just a story about the past. It's a story about every moment, every choice, every chance we have to see another being as worthy of our compassion. Visitor from past. Why does this place feel so familiar, even though I've never been here before? Visitor from future. Because the choice to connect is written into your essence. You felt it in that Belgian forest centuries ago. You feel it now. You will feel it in every future moment. It's the same choice, just in different forms. Sound of wind through trees, echoing across time. Narrator. And so the story continues not as history, but as eternal truth. In every choice to see another being as worthy of compassion, in every moment when fear gives way to understanding, in every heart that remembers that the most powerful force in the universe is not destruction, but connection. The journey that began with two men in a Belgian forest continues across all of existence, reminding us all that our greatest strength lies not in what separates us, but in what connects us. In every cycle, in every form, in every time. The choice to see others as worthy continues. This is the legacy of Miller and Stigler. This is the promise of consciousness itself. This is the story that never ends. Final text. And in all the cycles of existence, there is only one truth that remains. We are all connected. Choose to see. Choose to connect. Choose to remember. Sound of universal connection music echoing across eternity. Scene end.